The brand name thing, honestly, this only really bothered me when I was like getting ready to apply for my MBA. And I was like, oh shit, I have this like barrage of experiences that don't really form a linear path. There's no brand names on my resume except for this IIT Madras. I am so screwed. I'm not going to get in anywhere. And that was the only time like the brand thing honestly bothered me. Until that point, it was like a little bit of, oh, probably I'm not earning the best salary I could because I don't work for like these big companies, but whatever, it's fine. I'll figure it out. I'll work my way up. That was my general approach. I think for me, another thing was I'd generally been more drawn to like the kind of work and what opportunities I would have rather than, oh, this is a clear path that you can follow if you join our company, or this is a clear path that going into this big brand name industry is going to afford
Welcome back to another episode of Instea Unfiltered. Today, my guest is Samvita Kalyan Kumar. I'll let her introduce herself, but before that, this is a very exciting episode because it's our first guest who has gone on to do an MBA, who has also, well, not our first guest, but she's among the first few women who's contested for an election in Instea. And I'm sure there's a lot more interesting anecdotes that are going to come up in this episode. So thank you so much, Samvita, for joining us.
Uh, I'm glad to be here, and thanks for putting this together. I think it's a really nice initiative and a way for us to sort of let juniors who we probably would never get a chance to meet learn what it's like to be in Instea and what to expect when you graduate from Instea.
Right. So let's get straight to it. I know you graduated around 2014, 2015. So do you want to start out with what you did in Instea, what degree you graduated from, where, when, all of that?
Sure. So I graduated in 2015 with a dual degree in civil engineering. I actually entered Instea as a BTech and I converted to a dual degree student because I was honestly pretty confused and was, seriously considering if I wanted to do like a master's in engineering, like even after, or maybe even a PhD at that point. I absolutely enjoyed civil engineering, but then come placement time, there are more attractive jobs that pay better and sound more exciting, which is the ones I ended up sitting for on like day one and so on. I finally but when I did graduate, I didn't take up the job that I got through placements. I joined an Insti startup called Hyperverge, which now is huge. But back when I was graduating was when they just finished raising their seed round, and they were very much hiring their core team of both business and engineering side, and that's what I ended up. I ended up joining their business side. I worked with Hyperverge for, I want to say, almost a year because I did start working with them before I graduated. But I had this like itch that I wanted to get back to civil engineering, and I was really interested in environmental engineering. So I went back to Instea and worked with a prof for, again, almost a year, I want to say, trying to decide if, I wanted to do a PhD and figure that whole process out. Long story short, I clearly did not go on to get a PhD because I realized I didn't have the sort of discipline and motivation that I needed to do research by myself. That led me to then make a pivot into consulting within the international development space. So I worked for a company called Athena Economics for about 3.5 years, right until I began my MBA. Mostly doing projects focused around international development with large foundations like the Gates Foundation, World Bank, IFC, those kinds of organizations, as well as governments in India, like state governments, central governments, on various kinds of initiatives, schemes, programs that they wanted to roll out. I really enjoyed that work, but I kind of felt like I was reaching my limits in terms of what I could learn and the kind of impact that I could have very quickly. And after a lot of meandering around, trying to figure out what degree I wanted to do next to, again, decide what my life needed to look like, finally settled on an MBA. The motivation behind an MBA for me was to try and pivot into energy and clean tech, which in the US, especially in the Bay Area, is big. But on the way to getting that job, I will be taking another detour into consulting for a few years to just build more skills, build a better network, and then eventually figure out what within clean tech I actually want to do.
I see.
So very, very meandering path. I still don't think it has like there's any sort of clarity in terms of where it's going, but doing fine so far.
No, I think that's actually the boat that most of us are in. And I think what's admirable about that is you seem to have never fallen into a sunk cost policy that you were never really afraid to switch into something if you felt like at that point your interests were taking you somewhere else. So that brings me to my next question. While like before we enter Insti, the path for us is so planned, right? You're supposed to put in a certain number of hours, read a certain number of books, crack the JEE, get into IIT. And once you get into IIT, you are able to exercise a little bit more of your agency. There's maybe 3 4 different paths, and you try a couple of different things, try to figure out what you want to do. But once you graduate, I assume, I mean, I've graduated, but I'm locked into a PhD program. So I haven't had to think about this too much. But once you say enter the job market, how have you navigated not having a set path, or a set prescription to follow? Say, like,
I have
your
to.
first job was in Hyperverge, right?
Mhm.
So like even going from that job to the next job, what was your mind space like, and how have you navigated that?
If I'm being really honest, I think for me, my choices have mostly been driven by two things. The first is just like trying to stay true to this interest that I always had in like environmental engineering and tying it towards like sustainability and environmental impact in some way. So that's one thing that's generally driven most of my decisions, career decisions. The second has been like a process of elimination. And I would say that's more what has brought me to this point so far rather than, I mean, it's a combination of like both, like what's this core sort of interest and passion that I have that's driving me, and what do I not want to do? So, what do I not want to do made me eliminate a lot of things early on. Like, startup was an easy decision because at that point I knew that there would be so much to learn, but I would not be bound by like a job description or like a team description or things where, I would feel unable to explore whatever it is I wanted to do. And that's exactly what Hyperverse was. Like we were so early stage when I was with them that everybody literally got their hands dirty doing everything. And I honestly learned so much from the 1 year that I was there than I think I've learned in most other jobs since. Right. So that for me was a really formative experience. But I keep coming back to like the point number one that I made, which is what is like the core interest or passion that I have, which is like environment and sustainability. So for me, I would say that has really been a big driver, and I've been like meandering trying to figure out where I could fit in that space. Just trying to understand different roles, different impacts that you could have. Like even within sustainability, there's so many different kinds of roles, companies, just what the focus of these companies is. So doing my research, trying to figure out what could be interesting, what won't be interesting, and balancing those two aspects is basically what's led me to make most of my career choices so far.
So then, say in the theme of environment and sustainability, there's so many ways to partake in that field. Uh, how did you make the decision for yourself to maybe not go into a PhD or go into academia and instead maybe explore that same theme in industry? And what do you think are the sorts of question someone should ask themselves if they were in your position and didn't know which way to go?
I think the easy answer for me was I just tried it. I think for me, wanting like trying to make that decision of should I do a PhD or not, the easy choice that I saw in front of me was to just work with a prof for a few months as a project associate in Instea and see how that went. And it was a big risk that I took because when you work in Instea, you really don't get paid much, and it is like unless you go into a PhD, you need to like be confident in yourself that if this doesn't work out, you'll figure something out and you'll find a job after you're done with your project associate, role. So for me, it was just, I felt like at that point, I just needed to take that leap of faith and try it and see what it was like. And just having a hypothesis in my mind and using that to like go forward with applying for a PhD would not work out. The other thing was I knew that if I wanted to be serious about applying for a PhD, I really needed to like get some more research experience, and this would help me do that. In hindsight, I think probably there were a lot of signs that a PhD was never the right degree for me, even when I was in Instea. I struggled a lot with my thesis, and that should have been like a good indicator that maybe research wasn't what I was destined for. But I did it anyway. Like I tried my best to make it work. I think in terms of what questions you could ask, since I didn't end up going down the PhD route, I think it would be my questions would probably have revolved more around just do you have kind of the aptitude for the lifestyle that a PhD requires, which is being very self-motivated, being very focused on this goal that you have, and more importantly, I mean, not getting FOMO, so to speak, based on what your friends who are not doing a PhD are doing. I think that tends to be like the difficult thing to deal with. But I think more importantly, if you want to be able to do a PhD, you need to be self-motivated enough to like work in this unstructured environment and know that you will thrive in it.
Right. And as you were saying, I think some of the indicators are how your thesis project ends up for you, and maybe if you can get some experience while you were in Instea with a professor and stuff like that.
Yes, I did a little bit of that as well, but again, I was not self-motivated enough to like keep pursuing the prof even after a project had progressed beyond a certain point. Again, this is kind of a dance between the professor themselves. Some tend to be really motivating themselves, and they will push the project forward. With others, you need to push the project forward. I think the profs I worked with ended up being more in the latter category, including my thesis advisor. So for me, that was probably a really good indicator that a PhD may not have been the right decision.
Right. So then what about your professional experiences? What were signs in those experiences that you picked up that affirmed the path that you were on, that these are spaces that you're better suited to?
So I think given where I am right now, it probably makes sense for me to focus on my experience at Athena Infonomics. So Athena Infonomics is a consulting firm. So like what I did there was mostly consulting work for different kinds of clients. I think for me, the fact that I wasn't working on one project for too long was a good motivator. And like, I like the fact that I was constantly working on new areas, like completely new areas that I had no background in, and I had to like come up to speed very quickly. I always had new teams, I had new clients, like that constant change was something I enjoyed, and that's partly why I will be going into consulting even when I graduate. Now that I've graduated from the MBA, other things that really worked for me were definitely the subject matter. So it was something that spoke to me in terms of my interest, just working in this international development space focused on sustainability. So for me, it kind of helped me find my leanings or my bearings or whatever you'd like to call it. So that was another big motivator for me. And the third was the team itself. So the team at Athena is like young, mostly, started by people who were not much older than me. We were all very smart people, just kind of figuring it out themselves, very motivated. So being in that kind of environment also was great. Like it was very youthful energy, and there was this constant focus on learning, which also was very similar to what I had at Hyperverse. So I liked that a lot, and that's what kind of kept me there for so long.
I see. So I think one of the themes in all of your experiences post Insti were none of them were these like brand name day one companies. And how did you navigate just the peer pressure of not conforming to those paths and instead taking a chance on startups that were so new, nearly unheard of, then taking a break from that and going back into Instea to do a prof project. So, how did you navigate, say, the peer pressure, and also how did you explain this to your parents?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that was something I did struggle with, like the parents part, like making them feel confident that these were decisions I was making in my best interest. I think the answer to that was I just went and did it anyway. Like they were unhappy. They were like, what are you doing? But I was just like, I'm just going to do it. I need to know what this is like. And they knew they couldn't really change my mind. So they let me. I mean, what else are they going to do? Like it's my
Right.
decision to make. Um with I think my first experience with that was, with Hyperverge itself, telling them that I'm going to be joining this early stage startup. They have funding, but it's still only a seed round, all of that. And for me, it was a bit of an uphill battle, but then somebody randomly talked to my dad once and told him, and he mentioned this, and they're like, oh, they're working in like this artificial intelligence space, and told my dad, oh, that is actually an up and coming field. Your daughter isn't like lying to you about it. And my dad was after that, my dad was fine.
I
He like
see.
had no further questions or issues about my decisions and my life choices after that. So that was the parents thing. It's hard, but I think one thing you need to remember, especially when you graduate from Insti, is that you are now a full grown adult by yourself. You have your own responsibility for your life and your choices, and you should not worry about what other people are going to say, or like be concerned about other people's judgments of your choices. Like this is your life. You should be confident in being able to do what it is you want to do. So I think it's just remember that you've been through this huge experience of being in Insti. It's a lot to go through. You learn so much and grow so much in those 4 or 5 years, and you should trust yourself to make the right decision at that point forward. So that was in terms of just how did I convince my parents. The brand name thing, honestly, this only really bothered me when I was like getting ready to apply for my MBA, and I was like, oh shit, I have this like barrage of experiences that don't really form a linear path. There's no brand names on my resume except for this IIT Madras. I am so screwed. I'm not going to get in anywhere. And that was the only time like the brand thing honestly bothered me. Until that point, it was like a little bit of, oh, probably I'm not earning the best salary I could because I don't work for like these big companies, but whatever, it's fine. I'll figure it out. I'll work my way up. That was my general approach. I think for me, another thing was I'd generally been more drawn to like the kind of work and what opportunities I would have rather than, oh, this is a clear path that you can follow if you join our company, or this is a clear path that going into this big brand name industry. I would say that, yeah, that was like a difference in how I saw my decision making pre MBA. I have to say that has changed a little bit post MBA, mostly because I see there is a lot of value in being at a big company and learning with that structure. So that's what I'm
Right.
going to do for a few years, and then we'll see where I go from there.
I mean, for all the anxiety about not having a brand name on your resume outside of IIT Madras, she made it to UC Berkeley for her MBA. So just I think it's actually very motivating to know of someone who has gone to a place that you want to go to without, say maybe a CGPA that obviously merits it, or a job experience that obviously merits it. So thank you for taking the path that you did. I'm sure it's going to be very inspiring for lots of other people. Um,
Yeah. One thing, if I may quickly add at that
oh
point,
yeah, for sure.
especially if you're considering an MBA, is it really matters how you tell your story. And you sort of hold all of the power in how you tell your story. Like, it doesn't matter what brand names you've had. IIT itself is a really big brand name. It's going to open many doors, especially as far as this whole process is concerned. But beyond that, how you tell your story really makes a big difference in where you go and what schools you get into. So I will add that.
Right. No, so just off of that comment, I wanted to ask you, so what is an MBA all about for someone who's in Insti? And an MBA is generally not something that you do fresh out of graduating from Insti either. So why did you think that an MBA was something that made sense for you at the time that you applied for it? What did you end up learning? And then maybe I can ask some follow-up questions after that.
Sure. So I'll start with the first question, which is why did I feel like an MBA was right for me? Honestly, it was again another leap of faith that I took. When I was working at Athena Economics, my work was really like focused on public policy and international development. And my initial thought process was to do like a master's in public policy, or like a master's in public administration, or something that generally people do to get to like make a career jump within that same industry. But as I just started doing my research, I realized that MBA would sort of give me a very similar opportunity in terms of what jobs are available to me after the degree and more.
I see.
And secondly, it would also cost the same. Like, both these degrees would cost the same, but just the ROI on MBA would be so much higher.
Right.
So for me, that was when I made the switch in thinking, and I started realizing that maybe an MBA was actually a better degree for me. Another thing that helped me in this whole process was speaking to seniors, especially people who I knew had probably gone through a similar thought process as me. And one person in particular that helped me make this, actually, two people in particular that helped me make this decision. Vinay Sridhar, who I think 2012 or 2013 batch, worked at McKinsey, went on to work for the government of India, then went to Harvard, and I think now I don't know where he is right now, but he was seriously considering an MPP at one point. So like talking to him really helped me make that decision. And Aditi Kumar, who is, I think, HS13 again, something. Again, very similar, worked in similar industries as me, so was making similar decisions to me, and talking to them really helped me figure out what degree was right for me. Why an MBA for me? I realized that an MBA would help me build a broader business skill set that I didn't have through my career until that point. At this point, I was now far enough along in my career path that doing anything technical was kind of out of the picture. So like I knew I had to like focus more on becoming either more business aligned or becoming more like academically towards the public policy aligned. So the business side just made more sense in terms of what it would offer me as opportunities, and also align better with my skills that I felt. So with the MBA, I was really hoping to get out of it a broader skill set that was business aligned. I wanted to improve my general leadership abilities and how I carried myself as a leader. And the third thing, of course, was just building a network that I could then tap into when I wanted to like lean into my sustainability interests.
Right. So now that you have like finished your MBA, uh, do you first off, why an MBA in the US versus an MBA in India? And do you think you were able to, or rather, what did you gain from the MBA that maybe you didn't expect going into the process?
That's a really good question, and it's making me reflect on like the last 2 years. Something that I have been doing a little bit on and off, but not that well. I think the thing that I didn't expect, honestly, was just how how good the network was going to be. I knew it was going to be good, especially at like, a top 10 MBA. But now that I'm seeing my classmates graduating and like what kind of jobs they're going into and what kind of companies they're starting, like I'm, it's sort of driving in further the point how accomplished and cool these people are and how willing they are to help and make you succeed. And to me, I think for me, that's been like the thing that has surprised me a little bit about an MBA because it is also at the end of the day still a very competitive degree.
Right, right.
So
And
yeah, I
the
would say that's surprising.
right, and the MBA in the US versus MBA in India.
Oh yeah. So by the time I decided I wanted to do an MBA, I was too old to do an MBA in India because
What?
I'd been working. Yeah, I'd already been working for like I think what 4 years at that point.
Okay,
Typically for an IIM, I think the sweet spot is like 2 to 3 years. I could have done ISB, but then I didn't want to have just one choice of doing an MBA in India.
right,
And the real motivator, however, was I knew I wanted to make this sustainability switch. I mean, not a sustainability switch, but this clean tech switch.
right,
And that is an industry that is more mature in the US. So doing an MBA in the US would offer me a clearer path to like making that breakthrough.
right. So now that you are on the other side of your next degree, I want to see if you can imagine yourself back in Insti and sort of connect the dots from you in Insti to where you are right now. At what point do you think you were beginning to see that maybe it wasn't stuff like consulting or finance or data science that interested you? It was really this sort of environment and sustainability space, and maybe the trajectory from there. Like, did you have very strong notions about being interested in civil engineering as a freshman, or was that something that developed over time?
I think it developed pretty early for me. I just found a lot of the classes quite interesting from the outset. So it was easy for me to like keep enjoying the degree and seek out classes that I wanted to do. I think the interest in environmental engineering really peaked because of Professor Nambi. Like her classes were just great, and I did a bunch of classes with her, and I felt like I just learned so much, and that kind of kept my interest in environmental engineering strong, and made me want to keep pursuing that path. Um, when I sat for placements, yes, I sat for consulting in data science and all those other companies that typically everyone sits for, all the startups. Like, the only thing I think I knew from the outset that I didn't want to do is finance. So, like, I think the companies I didn't do my resume drop for were all the like investment banks and, anything fintechy related. I was like, yeah, I don't get this at all. This is a no for me. But
I
everything
see.
else, yeah, I dropped my resume, did
I
Schlumberger,
see.
all those interviews and all of that. And I was like, yeah, I'll figure it out when I come out of it. Also, I also did my resumes for core placements, but I ended up getting a job before like the core interviews rolled around, so it didn't actually sit for those, so to speak. Um, so I did get a little distracted then, I must say, and I think that's good because you should explore. You never
Right.
know what will end up clicking for you. You in your head, you may have an idea about what you're interested in, but in reality it might turn out to be absolutely boring, which is what I discovered when I did like my project associate thing. I was like, oh man, this research thing sounds damn cool, and then it was not. So I think like taking those chances and giving yourself the room to explore is also really important, and it's fine to get distracted once in a while. Like everything ultimately will work out.
Right. So now that we've gone back into slightly a bit of a nostalgia zone, with Insti and everything, I want to maybe ask a couple of questions about what Samvita was like while she was in Insti. So while I was in Insti, I have heard some anecdotes about what a legendary presence you had in the cultural sphere. So please tell us all about your experience in, I guess, Sangam or Sarang, and then maybe then we can get into your decision to contest for elections.
Okay, I don't know what this legendary presence is. Like carrying like some weird weight that I didn't expect.
No, it was all
Just
good,
like
good, legendary in a good way.
honestly, Saarang for me was just like a lot of fun, which is why I enjoyed doing it. Like it was 4 5 days of hanging out with your friends and like doing things that everyone thought was so cool, and you got to meet so many people who were like walking through campus, and yeah, it was just like a nice vibe, which is why I really enjoyed it. Like from the time I was a freshie, and kept bringing me back to Saarang every year. um I didn't do like I don't think I participated in a lot of like cultural stuff in terms of like doing let's talk events and all of that, but I discovered early on that I was good at organizing them. Like that was a skill set that I could contribute, and something that I was fairly structured enough about. Like I didn't have like maybe the talents to be great at music or whatever. I did do choreo, even though not insti choreo. But I think like I discovered that I had some skills in organizing, and to me, this was a good way to channel that and also get to like meet lots of people along the way and make friends along the way and all of that. So for me, Sarang and doing all the cultural stuff was at the end of the day a good way to like channel like this energy and skills that I had that weren't really getting used anywhere else. And also like meeting people, learning how to do things with new people every time, because like you're not always going to be in the same team. Like you work with different people always. So like getting used to that and learning how to be in a lot of ways a better leader, a better team member was what Sarang and the whole Instea cultural experience was about for me. In terms of how this affected my decision to run, honestly, I want to say it wasn't like something that I was super excited about. Like I was a Saarang core team member in my fourth year, and it was like people in my core team who were like, "Oh, why don't you run? Like you have one more year in Instea, we are graduating, but like you know how this shit works. You can like show people how it's supposed to work. Like you should run. This will be like a good thing for Instea. It'll be a good thing for Saarang." And so like talking to them, I kind of realized, okay, maybe this is something that I can tangibly make a contribution to and have a good impact on Instea in terms of what this is going to mean for Saarang and stuff going forward. So that was honestly what motivated me to run. And then when we started working on like my manifest and all of that, we realized that there were just so many learnings that I had picked up over the last 4 years, and especially being a core in like my fourth year, that could tangibly make a difference in terms of how Let's Talk and how cultural things were run in Instea going forward. Because I think there what my running would bring would be continuity, which usually wasn't the case, because like it was always someone new who would end up becoming the lit sec or the what is it called, culsec, yeah.
Yeah. I'll check, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was something that helped me convince myself that this was a good thing, and this is something that I could do. Obviously the elections were a whole other monster that after I dealt with it, I was like, yeah, honestly, I'm a little relieved I did win.
Right. I can imagine. So because at the time that you contested, there had only been one female elected representative ever, right? And I don't know if there were too many others who had contested at all.
I don't think so.
Right. So, first off, how did you even navigate that? Because it's scary, right? And I mean, the institution still is very gender skewed. So, how do you navigate being one of these historic firsts? And it's very relevant, the gender ratio in this case, because the institute is also organized physically in
Mm-hmm.
such a way that the women's hostels are so far away from the social epicenter of the campus, and you as an elected representative, you need their votes. It's not an option for you to only be around Sharavati, Sarayu, Sabarmati, and so forth. So how I mean, I guess you said that it was your core team that really encouraged you, but at some point, I think, your inner voice should have also confirmed that. So how did you go through that?
I want to say that it was a lot of confidence in the team, like the campaign team that was sort of rallying around me. It was like the confidence that, okay, these people are going to help me out and make sure that I'm doing the right things to reach people. So I would say definitely a lot of confidence in my team. I think if I was in a different position where I had to convince people to like help me campaign or to like be my campaign team, it would have been different. Like I don't think in that case I would have run. I think because I already sort of had a campaign team going into this whole process, it served as a great motivator and helped me sort of solidify my confidence in myself. In terms of navigating, the space of, okay, campaigning in boys' hostels and dealing with all these annoying men who are going to be nothing but intrusive when I do my campaigning, that having a role model helped, like knowing that Damini had done all this the year before and she had like shown these boys like they don't mean shit, was a big motivator. I was like, yes, someone has done this, there is precedent, there are processes, because when she campaigned, they had to put a lot of processes in place because they'd never had to deal with like a woman campaigning in boys hostels before. So like knowing that someone had done this before gave me a lot of confidence. So I would say it was less my confidence in my own abilities, more confidence in the people around me and what I knew together we could achieve, that made me feel confident about running.
Right. Yeah, because an election is never really a singular effort. So it helps to have that whole team behind you. And I think, every woman who's contested, irrespective of whether they've won or not, has seriously paved the path for every other women representative who's come. Because when I joined Instea in 2016, I think there hadn't been, after Damini, there hadn't been, a female elected representative. And I think your election campaign and her election campaign were such case studies for every other female candidate who had come afterwards. So, one of the great apprehensions that somebody has going into these elections, even after you've sort of figured out that there's a support system that's going to help you through this, you strongly believe that you have a vision that you're just itching to implement and you're well qualified to do this, but you still have to win the election to be able to do any of that stuff. um, I think one of the big hesitations is that it is a messy process. An election is a messy process anywhere, let alone an election in a campus of 18 to 22-year-olds who are just, trying to figure out how all of this works. I wouldn't say that decorum is something that process optimizes for. And it's draining, and it's very draining. And we've seen cases where somebody really puts their heart and soul and all of these hours into campaigning, and the worst case scenario is always that you don't win. And once you don't win, I know there have been cases where you've been so involved in that process that you just cannot snap out of it for a very long time, or you can't just get back to life as it was before, because that process is so transformative. And I think sometimes looking at how that has turned out for some people further reinforces the fear that this is something you really should not do unless you are very sure you can win. So what is your take on it all? Like, what did you learn from the process? And basically, clearly, you've done very well for yourself, despite the election outcome. So what would you say to somebody who wants to contest but is just very afraid about things like this?
I would say, number one, it's a very scary process, but I think the thing that I've seen with elections in Instea year after year is that the favorite doesn't always win, right? So there have been more underdogs and more people who just weren't expected to win who won, right? So like winning is not guaranteed, losing is also not guaranteed. And that's something that I've seen every year. So, always important to keep that in mind. Um, Second thing is that it's really important to have a team that you can trust and a team that is going to have your best interest in mind at all times. I think one thing that you pointed out was just, like dealing with the slander. I think my team was amazing at keeping that shit away from me. I didn't get a lot of it face to face. Like it was always like, rumors being passed around and people talking about other things. But like these guys would hear it and they would not tell me. And that made me that made sure that I was like insulated from a lot of crap and made me focus on, just being a good candidate, being confident in myself and my manifesto, and having the energy to like keep campaigning and going forward. So I think having a good team comprising like friends you can trust, even people who are not friends, but I mean, who you may not be great friends with, but who you have like a good relationship and you have like trust with them, and you know that, through the process, you'll kind of discover if they are going to be good teammates for you in a campaign. Like even those people are really important. Like I had a few people like that in my team who were just great at, making sure that I was staying focused. I wasn't getting all this slander wasn't getting to me, and like giving me good ideas to keep sort of talking about and all of that. So I think having a good team is just so important, and I cannot underscore that point anymore. I think the third thing I want to say is, yes, I know it's scary to think that if you lose, I mean, think of losing as an outcome and wondering how you'll move forward from that. But I think the amazing thing about being in Instea is that there's always something else to find, right? And even if elections don't work out and you don't end up like getting that position that you wanted, especially in your final year, you can bury yourself in your thesis. You can like, use this opportunity to like actually hang out with your friends and not have anything to do. Like just, I don't know if guru is still a thing, but like just sit in guru and like hang out all day without having to like run from meeting to meeting. You actually don't have to compromise on your sleep. Like think about like there's so many other things that you can do. And I think Insti does give you the opportunities to do it even if elections don't work out. It's hard. Like I think like I was in a funk for like a couple of weeks after elections after I lost. But then I gradually found my energy coming back, and that was great. And I was like, oh, cool, I can do all these other things now, and I can like think about things that are not elections. So that was nice. And, I had enough things to do for the rest of the semester. I was also behind on like so many assignments by that point. I was like, oh shit, I need to do all this so that I don't like fail half my classes. So like all of that just kind of got me back into a routine. And by the time summer rolled around, there was like internships, whatever, all of that. And it was all fun.
Right, right.
Yeah, I think like failure, especially something so public and of this magnitude, does teach you how to be more resilient. And it's not something that you should be afraid of because it's only really going to make you a stronger, better person.
Right. So I guess on that note, um, what has the impact of your entire undergraduate experience been on your life since you graduated? And how has that changed as the years have gone by? I would imagine, I think one of the anxieties that I had and a lot of my friends had while we were in Insti was like a GPA and how much that GPA matters and how long it's going to follow you for. And I know for a fact now that almost 2 years after my graduation, nobody actually cares. But at that point, every zero point 0.1 was an agonizing difference. So not just the GPA, but maybe other things like your resume or your circle of friends and things like that. How has that changed?
Okay, I'll start with the GPA since you brought that up. You don't, I don't know how things are in INSEE now. It seems like people do care about GPAs just generally a lot more than we did. But I think back when I was in INSEE, if you had like an 8 point something, which required a little bit of work, but not that much work, you were usually fine. If so long as you were like above 7.5, you could coast. I think if you were
Okay.
below 7.5, probably you needed to like, maybe put in a little bit more effort. But again, it depended on like what you wanted. Like GPA mattered only when like it came to placements and certain companies had like resume cutoffs. Like that's when it mattered. I know plenty of people who had like GPAs below 7.5, but had just done so much other shit in Instea that they had amazing resumes and they got like incredible jobs anyway. So I would say GPA matters if you're going to apply for a PhD, if you are interested in those companies that have GPA cutoffs. Otherwise, probably not that much. Um, Definitely did not matter when I applied for an MBA. I can tell you that much for sure. Nobody at any of the jobs I applied to gave a shit about my GPA pre-MBA also. So, definitely doesn't matter after a point. Um, in terms of things to do in Insti, I would say this is actually pretty important. Like, whether it's internships, whether it's CORs, whether it's projects, you need to be doing something outside of just your academics that's allowing you to build a skill set that employers are actually going to be interested in. Yes, people from Instea are incredibly smart. Yes, we're all fast learners and we can probably pick up most skills very quickly. But I think Instea gives you so many opportunities to actually build some of those skills along the way. Like not taking advantage of those opportunities is a shame, and you should definitely keep doing that. So I would say whatever it is, you can find out what it is. Maybe it's part-time internships, maybe it's like working at CFI or whatever. I don't know. There are so many things that you can do, and like doing those things is definitely very important in terms of helping you build skill sets, be a better person, and ultimately help you decide what job is actually going to be a good fit for you. So that's GPA, that's POs. What was the other thing that you asked about?
Your network. So say
Network.
somebody, right? Yeah. Suppose someone feels the pressure to like really network while they're in Insti,
Mhm.
and like how do you gauge whether you've connected with enough people in Insti?
I think my approach to networking, honestly, is more incidental than intentional. I want to say, like, I would rather put myself out there, but just let the networking sort of happen rather than being very intentional about, oh, I need to connect with this, and this person. And that's the approach I had in my MBA as well. And the reason I say this is because at the end of the day, like your network is something that kind of stays with you regardless of how close or not close you were when you were in college, right? And this is something I've noticed since I've graduated also. If someone knows that, oh, you went to NC at the same time that I was there, maybe they heard about you more often than not, unless you were like an outright asshole. Most people generally will be like, yeah, cool, I'll help you. Like, do you need a referral for a job? Here, you have this. Do you need someone to talk to while you're trying to decide if this master's degree is right for you? Sure, I can connect you with someone. And that will keep happening. And honestly, I want to say, like, I think having been through an MBA, I do think that unless I guess you go to like Howard or whatever, like your IIT network is incredibly strong and will always be there for you regardless of where you are or like where in your life, what career stage you are in, what school you go to later. You can still always tap into that IIT network. And that's something that I've really discovered even while recruiting here.
Right. So no, so anybody who feels very anxious that they haven't spent enough hours on LinkedIn while they were in their undergrad, fear not. It's not really a big deal, is I guess the summary of
Not
that.
at all. Yeah, yeah. I mean, always remember, like, if you reach out to like an Insti senior on LinkedIn, doesn't matter how senior they are. Like the fact that you're an Insti junior means that they will. Maybe they won't reply immediately because they might be busy, but like eventually they'll reply and make sure they, take that time out to speak to you. So Also LinkedIn wasn't a thing when we were in undergrad. Like, I don't know, it's weird to me now that so many undergrads are on LinkedIn, and for us, like, I don't even remember when I made a LinkedIn profile, maybe like in my third job or something. um but I would say, like, especially with networking, like, be curious, ask questions, but get obsessed about it, because unless you're a serial networker and this is something that comes naturally to you, don't stress out about it and don't get obsessed about it, because, like, remember that, like, the network is always going to be there just because of where you are right now.
Right. So maybe one final question before we wrap this episode. What would your message be to somebody whose interests, like yours, was not something that Insti easily delivered to you? You were interested in a very niche role. And how do you maintain the faith for yourself as you explore this very non-traditional path?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's a difficult one to answer, because I think everyone's answer to this is going to be a little different. But I think for me, honestly, what gave me the confidence to, like, be this sort of non-traditional person in terms of where I went with my career was just knowing that there were people who did this before me and turned out fine. Like, there
Right.
were always people in who had graduated before me, who I could look to, who had not gone to, like, big name brands, and, like, not done all these, like, supposedly cool jobs, and gone to, like, a random startup, but then they built that startup from the ground up, and, like, now they're doing really cool things. And I think for me, knowing that there are people who've done this and they turned out fine was always like a vote of confidence. So I would say, just remember that maybe you're the first person to do this particular thing, but there are definitely people who you can look up to, reach out to, who've done other non-traditional things that will definitely help you figure your path out.
Right. And she's one of one of those
Yeah.
people. Right. All right. So maybe we can end this episode on some fun questions after all of these fun days. So a little rapid fire. No Insti podcast can ever be complete without some mention of monkeys. So, what
Oh my
was
God.
your most outlandish encounter with a monkey ever?
Oh man. Um, I think it was this one time, I think in second year, we were like three people in a room at that point, and I was like taking a nap, and my roommates, I don't know where they went, but like one of them, I think, didn't shut the door properly. So I woke up to, like, find monkeys in my room drinking my water, just being chaotic like they generally are. And obviously, I screamed and stood on my bed, managed to find a broom somehow and chase them out. I
Oh,
think to me,
wow.
that was probably the most chaotic. Uh, I've witnessed stories of other people being attacked by monkeys. Fortunately, it was not me.
Right. I mean, yeah, in that way, I would say Insti makes you brave. Like the election process makes you brave in one way, but the monkeys make you more brave in a very primal way.
Yeah, like,
Um,
instinct puts you through so much. Like, I'm sure there's just a lot of anxiety that you have while you're in Insta right now. But, like, once you graduate, you kind of realize that you've been unknowingly just becoming like the stronger, better person who's been gaining all these skills through the years, whether it's like teaching, like learning how to deal with monkeys, or like
right,
learning how to deal with, like, boys who can't keep their mouth shut, or like, whoever it is.
right,
You're just constantly picking those skills up. And while it sucks when you're in NC, and for sure NC needs to have better support systems to help you deal with it while you're there, it does at the end of the day help you learn and grow and be a much, much stronger person by the time you graduate.
right. All right. So another question I wanted to ask you was, what is one Insti regret that you have? Something that you didn't try or didn't do that you regret?
Mm, I think couple of things. One was not being on like the Insti choreo team, which was something I wanted to do. I just like, and I did get in. I just like got a little spooked by the time commitment, and I was like, if I do this, I can't like hang out with my friends, whatever, something like that. So I ended up not doing it. And the other thing was, I was really interested in like, okay, really interested in the sense I like the idea of doing something at C5, but just never had discipline to do it. So I think that's
Same. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's definitely a regret. Like I used to hang out in C5 a lot, just doing nothing useful, just like bothering my friends who were actually doing useful things.
I see. I see. All right. So hanging out in C5 brings me to the next question. What was your favorite hangout spot in Instea?
Um, Guru was great. I think outside SAC is also great.
Mm, right.
IRCTC is still around. I don't know.
Is what
Near
around?
IRCTC, near the
Yeah, yeah,
Power
yeah, yeah,
Hostel.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it
Yeah.
so a lot of that got shut down just before the pandemic, like around a year before.
Okay.
So
Okay.
IRCTC was later called Suprapa, but it was around. And
Right. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
Gurunath was also around, but then I think now it's called Prime Mart.
They
Um,
still have like the sit and stuff, or is it just like a store?
so they got rid of the umbrellas and that seating
Mm-hmm.
area maybe into my second or third year, but now it's just a store. But now with the
Oh,
pandemic, everything is just running at very minimal
right.
operations.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
and
Guru
then
was great. You could spend an entire
Guru
day at Guru just
spent an entire day at
yeah,
Guru.
yeah, just
Yeah,
talking to people.
right, right. The OG LinkedIn, the
Yeah.
degrees of
Honestly,
connection.
yes. Yes. Because like someone or the other would just walk past and you would like sit and chat with them for 15
Yeah.
minutes or whatever.
How
Yeah.
many tables you were away from the other person was the second, third,
Yeah.
fourth connection.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And yeah, my final question is if you could have only one meal of Instea as every meal of every day for the rest of your life, what meal would that be? Particularly from the mess, actually, not even Instea.
Okay, honestly, I actually do have an easy answer for this. So they used to serve like pongal in the girls' mess.
Right.
That was really good. Yeah,
That's really good.
yeah.
Cool. So, Pongal in Vindhya mess?
Vindhya, yeah, yeah.
Vindhya. Yeah. All right. So, on that appetite enhancing or suppressing note, as it may be for the audience concerned, I would really like to thank Samvita for her time for joining us for this episode. So, yeah, here's a reminder to subscribe to this podcast. And thanks again, Samvita, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This is great.